In today's class, I want to speak about women's hair covering, the obligation for women to cover their hair. I'll speak a little bit just for 5 minutes about the Talmud and the origin of this law, and I want to speak about it particularly today. What makes it so troubling is, for example, Rabbi Soloveitchik, his wife didn't cover her hair when she went out. There are many prominent rabbis whose mothers didn't cover their hair when they went out. In Europe, in England, 50 years ago, it was unheard of for an average Orthodox woman to cover her hair. In Lithuania, in many Middle Eastern countries, and in many European countries, people didn't cover their hair. So for me, we have to go through the Talmud and we have to see if such customs have to be changed, or could we say, well, this is their custom, let's keep their custom as it is, if there's any Talmudic basis for such a custom. In the Talmud, there's a Mishnah discussing the Hilchot Ketubah. A woman who infringes the agreement of marriage doesn't get a Ketubah when she leaves. So part of the infringing right of Ketubah is modest dress, what is Dat Yehudit, what is acceptable in the norm of Jewish women, the custom of Jewish women at the time. That's Dat Yehudit. And the Mishnah says, for example, hair covering. Woman who leaves with her hair uncovered, that's Dat Yehudit. The Talmud says, how can you say that's just a custom? That's in the Torah. Because the Torah says it's Doraitahi. The Torah says that a Sotah, the Kohen, uncovered her hair. And Rabbi Ishmael said this is a source that a woman needs to cover her hair. Because the Sotah is a woman who's accused of cheating on her husband, and then there's a whole ritual they do. And part of the to embarrass her, they uncover her hair. So Rabbi Ishmael says in the Talmud that to embarrass her, what we do is we remove her head covering, and then we undo her braids. And from here we see that a woman should cover her hair because the Kohen undid her hair. So from here the Talmud says we see that it's a Torah, it's the Oraita, it's in the Torah. And therefore, why does the Mishnah say it's just the custom of women? It's not. It's in the Torah, right? So this is the source of the Talmud. This is the Talmudic source. So there are a few other sources that discuss hair covering, but this is the Talmudic source for the law of women covering their hair if they're married. Now, if they're unmarried is a whole nother discussion. Do unmarried women have to cover their hair? That's a debate. But the Torah is discussing a married woman. An unmarried woman can't cheat on her husband, right? So this is the source for a married woman to cover her hair. Now, is this law a biblical or rabbinic prohibition for women to cover their hair? So most rabbis say, well, the Talmud says, it's a Torah law. Because the Mishnah says it's a custom of women. And then the Talmud questions, how can you say it's only a custom? It's Doraita, it's in the Torah. We see from the woman uncovering her hair. So many rabbis assume that it's a biblical violation. However, the Rambam seemed to have learned that it is a rabbinic violation. The Rambam doesn't say so clearly, but from the context where he put it, it seems that way. And many, many rabbis, including the Trumat Hadeshen, who was a very, very important rabbi who's often quoted in the Shulchan Aruch as one of the primary sources, he understood it to be a rabbinic violation. I personally agree with him. So what do you do with the Talmud saying it's biblical, it's in the Torah? So I once collected all the times the Rambam a verdict from the Talmud, where the Talmud says that something is a Torah law, and it's about a 50-50. So sometimes it's Torah, sometimes it's rabbinic. When the Talmud says something is Doraita, it's completely meaningless. My favorite example for this is when the Talmud says that a document, right? Let's say me and you, we get into a fight, and I say, owe me money, you say, don't owe me money. So you go and bring a paper that says, here, to witnesses signed, you lent me money. Do courts accept testimony on paper? So the Talmud refers to this as the same. Different people, Rabbi Gamliel, different people establish different things for Tikkun HaOlam. How could you say it's for Tikkun HaOlam? Doraitahi, right? The Rambam says it's not Doraita, it's rabbinic. And there are many examples where the Talmud will say something is from the Torah, and the Rambam, to him, it's meaningless. It's like a 50-50. I once collected all the sources and I counted them, and about half the times the Talmud will say something is biblical, the Rambam will not care and not say it's biblical. So to the Rambam, it seemingly is not a biblical violation. So I guess the first question is, if a custom develops, right, in many countries, wrongfully against a rabbinic law, do you have to change the custom, or could you say the custom overrides a rabbinic law? So that's the first question I guess I would want to put out to the table. If a custom develops in some country against a rabbinic law, like for example, according to the Rambam, it's only rabbinic to cover your hair. So following the Rambam's reasoning, if a custom develops against this law, should we fight the custom, or could we say let's leave the custom and the custom overrides the rabbinic law? So this is a very, very big debate, and there are sources from the Talmud that indicate that when people do the wrong thing, if you can't change it, let them do it. There aren't that many sources to prove that you shouldn't fight a bad custom. The Be'er Sheva is the first one I know of that argued in favor of overriding a rabbinic law to uphold a custom against a rabbinic law. But then many rabbis argued with him, and the consensus became not so. The consensus became that you can't change a rabbinic law, you can't override a rabbinic law because the custom developed that way. But let's not forget that you have people like the Be'er Sheva who was a very great rabbi, who did hold that a custom could override rabbinic law, even if the custom developed wrongly. So it's a wrong custom, but it overrides rabbinic law. But if the custom, fighting the custom won't change their minds, then it's better to stay quiet and not to change their minds. Yeah, is what I'm saying logical? So if you could change people's minds, fight the custom because people are going to change their minds, right? Not like the Be'er Sheva. But even this party who says that you should fight the custom, it's only if the custom will change. If you can't change the custom, it's better they do it unknowingly than they sin knowingly. That would be the rationale. This is number one. Now, following this, what is the Torah law and what is the custom? The Mishnah says it's a custom to cover your hair, and the Torah law is to cover your hair. Torah law is to cover your hair to a certain degree, and then the custom goes beyond that. The custom, according to many rabbis, could change. So you go to one country and they cover their hair to this degree. They go to another country, they cover their hair to that degree. But the Torah law to cover your hair, how much of the hair is it? Why is it? What is it? Yeah?
Do you know why?
Why? Why would they uncover the hair? That's an important question for the next argument, because if the reason no longer applies, maybe the law wouldn't apply.
Right.
Exactly. So the minimum measurement for the hair covering is debated amongst people what the Torah law for the minimum is. And it ranges down to either anything or braiding your hair and things like that. According to many rabbis, including the Magen Avraham, and actually from the Satmar dynasty, there's the Satmar and there's the Sigat dynasty. The Satmar Rabbi Yoel moved away to Satmar from where he grew up because his older brother was the rabbi there of the Sigat dynasty. So there's a rabbi in the Sigat who wrote a response to him, and he also follows this opinion. Many rabbis follow this opinion that braiding is enough biblically. The rest is only rabbinical. Now, today women don't braid their hair, but they organize their hair properly and they make it look nice. The argument could be made that today women who spend 10 minutes on organizing the hair and they put pins in it and things like that, that's the equivalent of braiding your hair. Which means on a biblical level, you are not covering your hair, it's only the custom. Now again, if you live in Europe, the custom here is to not cover your hair, then the argument could be made that today women don't have to cover their hair. Now, while we've conceded that you don't override a custom when it's in conflict with rabbinic violation, when you have legitimate people like a Magen Avraham to rely on, maybe the custom would override the standard studying of the halakha. Yeah, this is argument number one I'm presenting. We would not override the rabbinic law, like the Be'er Sheva says, for a custom, but the custom definitely should be strong enough to side with a Magen Avraham, to side with many, many great rabbis who hold that braiding your hair is enough on a biblical level, on the Dat Moshe, on the important level, and that the custom in Europe is to not cover your hair at all. Therefore, it's completely permissible to uncover your hair. Yes, that's going to be my next argument. Yes. Why should women cover their hair? There's about 5 reasons given. What do people think here? Why should women cover their hair? So what originally got me very interested in the third argument of what's the reason for hair covering is he's a rabbi called the Shevet Shimon. Now, actually, I've read a lot of literature making this argument, a lot of people discussing it. I haven't seen too many people quote some of the sources, specifically the Shevet Shimon. He was a Hungarian rabbi, a Talmud of the Khatam Sofer from that school of thought. And he writes something very interesting. He actually is discussing over there wearing a kippah in synagogue. He's not discussing women, he's discussing men with head covering, and he gets off the track discussing women. He decided that the reason women have to cover their hair is not because it's attractive to men, but because women, it's like dressing properly. It's like a woman wouldn't go to a council meeting, to the parliament, to the UN, to address, a rabbi wouldn't come to synagogue without wearing a jacket, right? His wearing a jacket isn't because you're covering your shirt because it's attractive to people. Rather, you're wearing a jacket to look more presentable. So he says, you look at some of the Muslim countries, some of the more cultured countries, you'll see women always and men always cover their hair when they go out. Men wear hats, kippot. right? So he's saying the same should apply to women. Women cover their hair because they want to look more presentable. If in some country wearing a head covering makes you look less presentable, it's counterproductive. And he says, however, I'm too scared because I've never seen anyone write this before me, so therefore I'm not ruling like this, but it's how I would have ruled. That's a classic thing you'll see by rabbis when they come up with a creative idea. It's how I would have ruled. Now, I'll go through quite a few options of what the reason could possibly be. The Sefer Yehoshua makes a point you're saying, it's attractive to men. Today, that's no longer attractive to men because everyone has their hair out or whatever like that. Logic would argue you don't have to uncover your hair anymore. The Ben Ish Chai makes a very similar argument. Today you don't have to uncover your hair. Today women in European countries don't have to cover their hair because in European country, no one covers their hair. So it no longer is considered an erva. It's no longer considered parutz. What other reasons are there given for hair covering? This one I think is the most interesting, and it's along the line of the Shevet Shimon. The reason has to boil down to the source of hair covering. The Sotah is accused of cheating on her husband, so we embarrass her of covering her hair, right? The Talmud in Sotah says that she made herself beautiful for this man, and then the punishment is midah kineged midah. It's reciprocal. So the punishment for her sin is reciprocal for her sin. So it's logical that the hair covering is because she tried making herself look attractive for a guy. You uncover her hair. However, we find that the reason you uncover the woman's hair is to embarrass her. The reason you uncover the woman's hair is because you want to embarrass her. So she's embarrassed when her hair is being unbraided. She's embarrassed when her hair is being uncovered. So it's logical to say that the problem is uncovering her hair. Another interesting thing is the Rashi over there and many other people also seem to think that the reason is because it's embarrassing for a woman to have her hair uncovered. But what we do know is that the reason they covered her hair is because it's like, imagine, for example, when you stone someone to death, you get them completely naked. And the Talmudic discussion, is it better for them to be wearing something, so death is harder but less embarrassing, or for them to be less painful death because they're naked, but they're more embarrassed because everyone sees them naked, right? So the argument is that you're uncovering the woman's hair, you also uncover her chest to make her embarrassed, to make her feel uncomfortable, to make her... so that's why women shouldn't uncover their hair. None of these reasons apply today. Today it makes absolutely no sense for a woman to uncover her hair because she'll be embarrassed. She's not embarrassed. The Queen of England doesn't cover her hair, right? The previous Prime Minister was a woman.
She is embarrassed.
There was a Prime Minister.
More embarrassed.
England had few Prime Ministers who were women. None of them covered their hair. It's hard to understand these kind of logics in a modern society. Today, no one covers their hair. It's not considered unattractive. It doesn't attract men today. It doesn't embarrass women today. None of these reasons really follow. Now, the fact that it doesn't attract men today, someone can argue, I disagree. So I have to find rabbinic literature to support this. So you do have rabbis like the Aruch HaShulchan, the Ben Ish Chai, who argue that today you're allowed to read Shema in front of a woman's hair because no longer is it like it used to be back then. Today, women have their hair uncovered, therefore it's not a problem. Similarly, unmarried women, you're allowed to read Shema in front of their hair because it's no longer an erva. If people get accustomed to something, many rabbis say it ceases to be something which halachically we consider as something that is attractive to men. Therefore, the argument could be made today no longer does hair have that status. You disagree. Yeah. Right? There's one problem with this argument. The problem is once something is forbidden, you can't go back and find the reason and say, well, the reason doesn't apply anymore, let's get rid of the sin, right? You can't get rid of a prohibition because the reason doesn't apply. And that's essentially the big problem with this argument. I don't know if anyone was here for the time we spoke about cross-dressing. You were here at that time, I think. So we spoke about the idea that sometimes the Torah will give a reason for a sin. When the Torah gives a reason for a sin, then the sin is essentially connected to the reason. The Torah says don't cross-dress because it's a toeva, because it leads to sexual activity. It's only forbidden if it does. If the reason doesn't apply, neither does the sin. We spoke about many examples where the reason is essentially the defining character of the sin, not only to make it more strict, also to make it more lenient. If the reason for hair covering is given in the Torah, and the Torah tells you why you should cover your hair, then the argument could be made, well, the Torah told me why you should cover it. If that reason doesn't apply, no longer should we. Now, the Torah doesn't give a reason. All the reasons we mentioned earlier are post-Torah-ic. But the argument could be made in this case, it's even more than the Torah giving a reason. Normally, the Torah says, you should not cross-dress, and then it gives a reason. But the prohibition is clear in the Torah. The Torah does not say women should cover their hair. All the Torah says is, the Kohen would uncover her hair. And from there we see that women should cover their hair. that from there we see is essentially the reason. From there we see it's embarrassing, women should cover their hair. From there we see it turns men on, women should cover their hair. Whatever we see from there is the reason. The Torah is essentially commanding you the reason. That is what's in the Torah. The Torah doesn't tell you women should cover their hair, and then the Talmud comes up with a reason. The Torah doesn't tell you women should cover their hair. The Torah is essentially directing you towards a logical or premise behind the sin. An assumption. Right. Now in such a case, the argument could be made that Darshinan Taima Dekra. We care about the reason, and if the reason doesn't apply, then it's forbidden. And I'll just give a few examples from rabbinic literature today where they say this kind of an idea about the woman wearing wigs.
Wearing?
Wigs. Now, one of the women covering their hair with hair. So they're essentially covering their shaitel, yes. Shaitel, yeah. Could a woman wear shaitels? So there are quite a few rabbis who believe women can't wear shaitels, and they're violating a biblical prohibition by wearing shaitels. And their argument is the Torah says they shouldn't have their hair uncovered. And there's a reason for why women should have their hair uncovered. So if you're putting on a shaitel, you're essentially violating or committing the same sin.
No.
So they claim you're violating the exact same prohibition, whether it's covered or not makes no difference. Now, a lot of Ashkenazi poskim don't agree with that. But many people, and Rabbi Ovadia Yosef's son, Yitzchak Yosef, he collected a whole list of rabbis who hold like this. Now, as it happens, if you look through the list, a lot of them don't actually write this, and it's quite a stretch to get there. But quite a few of them do hold like that.
That one shouldn't wear.
That one who wears a shaitel is committing is transgressing a biblical violation which is to uncover your hair, because the Torah gives a reason, and the reason matters not. The Torah says don't steal. If I technically didn't steal, I didn't commit that sin. But the Torah doesn't say don't steal. The Torah tells you something which is reason-based. Then if you do anything to violate that reason, you've done this sin. So the Torah doesn't want you to uncover your hair for a reason. So if you're covering with a wig, you're still doing that same thing. Because in such a case, it's the intent behind the mitzvah that matters. Similarly, about hair being uncovered, many rabbis, I once collected a list of rabbis, many rabbis believe that theoretically, if it would be considered not something that's promiscuous for women to uncover the hair or something along those lines, it would not be considered a prohibition. So I think the argument could be made that for communities or for women who already live in a society where hair isn't covered, so the customary part of the Mishnah, Dat Yehudit, isn't relevant, then the biblical part wouldn't really apply if that's already the custom, because to fight a custom, according to Be'er Sheva, even a rabbinic law gets overridden by a custom. Over here, you have two fairly strong arguments to say that women don't have to cover their hair. First of all, because their hair is the equivalent of braided, which according to many rabbis is enough. Secondly, because the reason doesn't apply anymore today. Now, if someone, let's say, grew up Chabad, and in Chabad they're very strict about this, then you have a different problem, because over there they follow the Chabad rabbis and the Chabad Psak, the Chabad the Tzemach Tzedek, who says that even the sideburns have to be covered, even one hair has to be covered. If someone's from Hungary and he follows the Khatam Sofer, then also he's very strict about this, right? If someone's, modern Orthodox and follows Moshe Feinstein, he will say you can have 2 fingers worth uncovered around. But if someone grew up in a community like the Syrian community, where the hair is not covered, you don't have to change it just because Rabbi Moshe Feinstein and Tzemach Tzedek had a different way of analyzing the Talmud. There's a legitimate way of analyzing the Talmud that would result, for 2 strong arguments, that women don't have to cover their hair. Before I finish my class, and obviously I'm open for questions, I want to make it clear, a lot of the people discussing this and making arguments similar to mine are not doing a legitimate, for example, Rabbi Mashash, he was one of the first people to address this issue. And his response is, from beginning to end, just sheer nonsense. He wrote things which are not legitimate Talmudic reasonings. He does mention the braiding arguments, I'll give him credit, but a lot of what he writes is crazy. And I don't want, just because I'm saying an argument which sounds similar to what they're saying, I don't want my argument to be conflated with a lot of these kind of reasons. There's a guy in Australia that he put out the whole thing on why it doesn't apply today. And he just wrote nonsense. He made up nonsense in his response. So I think it's often, I want to be careful, but I don't want to be associated with what they write, because what I just mentioned now, like the Sefer Yeshua, the Ben Ishchai, Shevet Shimon, these are legitimate rabbis with legitimate reasonings and arguments as to how to study the Talmud. A lot of rabbis making this case haven't gone through the Talmud properly, and they write things which are just wrong. Yeah, so I'll just do the quick summary. The Talmud discussing hair covering learns from the verse where it says in the Talmud, the Sota's hair would be uncovered. To a woman who's accused of infidelity and as a procedure, They want to embarrass her, so they uncover her hair and undo her braids. So Talmud learns from there that it's not just a custom in different locations for women to have their hair uncovered. Rather, to have some form of a hair covering is in the Torah. It's from the Torah. It's midoraita. Now, the Rambam seems to understand that it's not a biblical violation, but many rabbis argue with that, and most rabbis seem to think that it is a biblical violation. Now, the Rambam is important and influential, firstly, because his opinion is mentioned in Shulchan Aruch. His wording is mentioned in Shulchan Aruch. It's not to say that's the consensus. It's not the consensus, but he's an important rabbi. Important enough that if a custom develops that way, it's definitely worthy of throwing in the Rambam's opinion to defend such a custom. The Be'er Sheva was of the opinion that a rabbinic law could be override by a custom, even if it's a wrongful custom. Similarly, in the Rabbi Matisyahu Tumrani had such a dilemma. He also mentioned similar arguments. However, the consensus is not so. The consensus is that you can't override a rabbinic law for a custom. A custom doesn't override a rabbinic law. But if people are already doing a custom against rabbinic law, it's better to not stop them, because it's better they do it, unknowingly than knowingly. Following this, I would argue that the oraita part of hair covering, the important part of hair covering, which we learn from the Torah, that might be only for braiding your hair, like many rabbis argue. Today, women who wear pins and have different gels, I don't know what women do to their hair, but the argument could be made that the long procedure of hair organizing and decorating is the equivalent of braiding your hair. And that way today, in a place where the custom is already developed that way, maybe this is what you call a snif lahakel, an argument you could make that they shouldn't change their custom because there's a Talmudic ground for their custom. Secondly, I argue that the mitzvah of hair covering is unique in the sense that the Torah doesn't say thou shalt cover your hair. The Torah says the Kohen would uncover her hair, and from there we see a principle. The principle has a rationale, a logic behind it. I would argue if that logic or rationale doesn't apply, in such a case, the sin or prohibition also doesn't apply. So therefore, I would argue that if the reason for this is because it's embarrassing for a woman, so therefore the Shevet Shimon would argue today it's no longer embarrassing for a woman. Women don't have to cover their hair. Similarly, if the reason is because it's pritzut, it's an ereva, it's attractive to men, then if today the rabbis will decide that hair is no longer considered attractive to men, so you could read Shema in front of it and things like that, then it would no longer be a prohibition to have your hair uncovered. The last point I made was that I don't necessarily associate myself with a lot of other people who have reasonings for why this mitzvah doesn't apply anymore, because a lot of what other people wrote, a lot of what some people wrote I do agree with, and they did a great job, but a lot of what people wrote was just nonsense. I don't want people to look at that and say, that's what I'm saying. And with that, I conclude. Thank you very much.